the Indian Indie, down the years, Curation art house showcasing, outreach and distribution. And who better to talk about it than someone who has curated for over more than 44 years for the Museum of Moving Art, Indian films, Indian cinema, right from selections from the filmography of Ray to a film as contemporary as Galadija by Babu Ishwar Prasad. I'm very privileged to invite Laurence Kardish, the artistic director of Film Columbia, an international film festival in upstate New York, and a teacher of cinema in the Graduate School of New York School of Visual Arts. And in conversation with him, we have Sudhir Mishra, who for more than 5 decades has been crafting films and telling stories that are young in attitude and rightfully restless. Sir, if I could please invite you. So welcome, gentlemen, and I'm sure this will be a fascinating conversation for all of us.
I haven't been around for 5 decades. Huh? Now, to put me at 75 or something, you know. Sorry. But Laurence has, it's interesting. I don't know how much of you are aware of the contribution of Moman to Indian cinema. Pather Panchali, for instance, was also partly funded by Moman. So, in work of our first great master, let us say, Moman had a contribution. Would you like to talk about that and your Moman's association with Ray?
Sure. We, in 1955, the Museum of Modern Art was preparing an exhibition called The Textiles and Ornamental Arts of India. Now, MoMA is a museum of modern art, and its textiles, fashion, design it is considered an art. And India had been an influence on contemporary designers and actually painters from Europe and from the US. Now, at that point, there was a man who was a trustee of the museum, Edgar Kaufman Jr. His father owned a number of department stores in Minneapolis, and he was the curator actually in charge of this exhibition. And he was a friend of the American filmmaker John Huston.
Yeah.
And John Huston said to Edgar, when you go to Calcutta to look at textiles to bring to the museum, I want you to meet a young filmmaker. His name is Satyajit Ray. He's working on a film called The Story of Apu and Durga.
Yeah.
And that, take a look, take a look at the footage. He's someone that you should know about, and if the museum could help him at all, that would be great. So Edgar met Satyajit Ray, saw some of the footage, sent some of the footage back, not the footage, he sent some of the photographs from the film back to New York to Edward Steichen, who at that point was the head of the photography department, and Monroe Wheeler, who was in charge of international affairs at MoMA. And both Steichen and Monroe Wheeler thought what they saw was terrific, and they said, well, when we open the exhibition, the Textiles and Ornamental Arts of India, let's see if we could show this film. And Monroe Wheeler and the museum sent Ray, I think it was $10,000, which was not an inconsiderable sum,
yeah,
to finish the film with the idea that the world premiere of The Story of Apu and Durga would take place at MoMA in 1955. By the time it got to MoMA, and the opening, it did happen. The film was shown, it had another title then, Pather Panchali, and the audience, even though they didn't understand it because it was shown unsubtitled, apparently it just had come out of the lab liked the film a lot, and there was a distributor of foreign language films in the audience that night. And he said, I want to take this film on for distribution, and the rest is history. So we do have, MoMA has a long time history with Indian cinema. And the amazing thing to me is that India becomes independent in 1947,
Yeah.
but by the early 50s, you already have terrific filmmakers working independently, like Raj Kapoor, and then whose first film is 1951. So, and then we have Satyajit Ray, and you have Ritwik Ghatak, who are marvelous filmmakers, all of whose works exist in the collection of the museum, and who are, according to American definitions of independent filmmakers, as is the other terrific film from the 50s, Mother India, which is more Bollywoodish, but is also an independently spirited.
I mean, in that sense, all Indian cinema, till about some years back, was independent, because in the American definition of independent, anything that's not a studio-backed film is an independent. So it's more a term that defines the financing rather than anything else. So since then, you've shown so many films, and coming over the years, what is your impression of has the promise of Satyajit Ray been fulfilled? What are the films today, and how do you view Indian cinema today?
Well, view it in two ways. There's what is known as Bollywood cinema, which is independent, and only in a certain way.
Yeah. Independence would mean in India we're independent in the head, non-formulaic.
Yes.
I mean, in a sense, those that don't make films in a set pattern, that there is a way of saying, and possibly there is also, you determine what can be said.
Okay.
I mean, those that break away from the norm, and many Indians have broken away from the norm, like, for example, who would be in quotes called Bollywood, which is a term I kind of detest, but but say outside, even in the Indian popular form, like Gurudal, the non-formulaic, broke the formulaic idiom and made films.
Yeah, to me, my impression of Bollywood cinema was changed when I read Maximum City. Sudeko Mehta's book about Mumbai, which I think is a terrific book, and I realized that the financing of Bollywood films is basically not so much Indian as black money from elsewhere.
Used to be,
okay. Yeah. But there are some Bollywood filmmakers, I don't know if you consider, the guy who makes the Shakespeare adaptations, Vishal
Bhardwaj. I would consider him an independent filmmaker and one of our finest.
You would, yes, because I saw a number of his films do play in New York and do play in the multiplexes.
Yeah.
They play on the same days that they open here in India.
That's right.
And I kind of was blown away by Hader, which I thought was a fascinating interpretation of Shakespeare. Shakespeare seems to be also a favorite of Indian filmmakers. I've just seen The Hungry by Banilu Chatterjee, which is based on Titus Andronicus.
And some would say the Indian Bollywood form is based on Shakespeare, because the Brits brought Shakespeare to India and then created a theatre form which was known as Parsi theatre because of the owners.
Yes.
Owners were Parsis, but it was kind of based roughly on a kind of Shakespearean comedies, let's say, or whatever. I mean, not the poetry of Shakespeare, but it's because Shakespeare was also a popular playwright, making thrillers and pretty interesting films. But of the later Indian films that today, what are you showing in, what exactly is MoMA's role in showing Indian cinema of independent Indian cinema today?
MoMA has a program that I helped start many years ago called New Directors, New Films, in which we try to show films by filmmakers who are new to New York. They could have made 7 or 8 films in the country of origin, but if they haven't been shown in if they're filmmakers whose works have not been shown in New York, that's what we would show. And we always try to show, we did always try to show an Indian film and look for one to present. I run a film festival now upstate in New York in an enormous theater in a small town. One of these white elephant theaters that we fortunately are able to run. And at this festival, I always try to show an Indian film that I basically discover here. Because I think the Film Bazaar does a terrific job of bringing together new, unseen films from all the regions of India and that are not Bollywood. So there are always discoveries to be made here, including past years, Reddy's Thithi, which I think is an extraordinary film, and of course also the film Court, which I think is one of the finest first films ever. Now these films do open in New York. There are a number of small distributors that will handle good films from wherever, but the market is small. However, the market is small in any one city, but if the films are streamed or become part of the art house circuit, they can do nicely. Not terrifically, but nicely.
What do you think stops? For example, you just took the names of 2 films that I love as well, and many Indians do, Court and Thithi. But somehow Indian cinema, after Ray, has not found a filmmaker or a set of filmmakers. We've not become, let's say, what the Iranians became, what the Koreans now are. Or that when you talk of cinema around the world or great films around the world, or let's say a young student in New York studying in Tisch, doesn't talk so much. He talks of a lot of Koreans, he talks a lot of Chinese, he talks of a lot of, but normally Indian films are, conversations that are had when you specifically bring up Indian films.
That is true.
And why do you think that happens?
I think that in Iran and in South Korea, there's the industry and the infrastructure are much more centralized. And in India, there really is not, except for something like the Film Bazaar, there isn't the centralization. In India, unlike Korea and Iran, they are much more homogeneous societies. One thing India isn't is homogeneous. There's like almost no nation on the face of this earth that has as much cultural difference is among your states than anywhere else. So there isn't, you'll have filmmakers working in a number of different languages here, representing a number of different cultures. So it's very difficult to have this centralized idea of
what is Indian cinema, or just to ascribe. Do you also think because we also have a popular industry which kind of is so large that it sort of dominates the conversation, so that we now are so identified by Bollywood, let's say, this so-called word which seems to define us. At one time, Satyajit Ray defined us, but now you go to Cannes and people talk about Bollywood. Everywhere there's this whole thing about Bollywood. Do you think that prevents the younger filmmakers from coming through, or conversations about them to come through?
I think that Bollywood certainly is an idea known around the world, and it's a very strong and kind of romantic idea as well. It's not, Bollywood is what anyone usually thinks of when they first think of Indian cinema. Now that may be incorrect, but
Yeah.
it's like thinking of Hollywood being American cinema,
Yeah.
whereas today the American independent cinema is in some ways much stronger than Hollywood.
Yeah.
But still, Hollywood has that overarching weight and heft to it. So I think Bollywood does kind of discourage non-Indians from thinking about Indian cinema as being really a very diverse and rich type of cinema with filmmakers from all the states doing some of the most amazing and wonderful experiments. But I think that part of the problem is why you don't have a Satyajit Ray anymore is because you don't have bodies of work of a filmmaker. A filmmaker appears and makes 1 or 2 films and then disappears. Now, I can't tell you why because I don't know enough about financing here, but the thing is that, you know, if Satyajit Ray had only made the Apu trilogy, he would be, of course he'd be applauded, it's a great trilogy, but he wouldn't be as revered as he is because it's not just the Apu trilogy, it's also the music room, the chess players, you know, it's Kachinjunga, it's so many other films as well. There's a body of work. I don't know of any of the filmmakers working today in the independent sector here that has such a body of work.
So how would you, I mean, as somebody who loves Indian cinema, and for instance, I often think that, you know, when for example, the best foreign film category is a very overhyped thing in India. We overhype every year at the time of the Oscars. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, everybody does. Everybody does.
So we say, oh, this film is going to the Oscars. It's the best foreign language category. I always wonder, you know, India being diverse, and we have 4 or 5 industries. We have Bengal. You know, when you say Bollywood, it's kind of a little insulting to the South, for instance,
of course,
which has a very independent, vibrant film industry. In Tamil, Telugu together would be is bigger than the Bombay film industry. And Kerala has its own, and it's not that people in Assam don't make films. So, I mean, I think sometimes that, you know, the Oscars should allow us 4 films.
Well,
you know, 4 films going into from India, because it's, you know, I mean, how can the Bombay guy understand this Assamese film, you know?
No, I totally understand, and on a certain level, I agree. It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
I know that with 100 and with 120 or 130 films that the Academy has to consider in the next few weeks, they're not going to add to it. I mean, I know so many Academy members, who said, "Oh, vote in this and that category," and they divide, the number of films up, and it's a whole kind of system. The Academy is not going to invite more films to consider. Although, you're right.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
in a sense, because you sit and work on a jury sitting in one of the main cities, and everybody's not aware of, and there are biases towards one's own, and sometimes a really great film from a gem from somewhere else might get missed out. I mean, I always wonder about that when one film goes from India. I mean, coming generally to cinema, Martin Scorsese, who works very closely with Mohammed and is very involved in the restoration and the saving of the analogs, and everything works, announced the death of cinema recently. Of course, he doesn't mean it, but what do you think he means?
Oh, I think he is saying that the idea of theatrical exhibition is endangered. I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
I don't think he was talking about film analog versus digital, because he himself loves analog, the actual film itself. Yeah. And many filmmakers like Chris Nolan and Tarantino and others are working
or Thomas Anderson,
on film, although they're editing and so forth on digital. I think the theatrical experience is somewhat endangered with, you know, all the streaming that is happening, and the fact that some of the series that are now being produced around the world are much more interesting than some of the big Hollywood, Bollywood films that are being made. And so I think this is what Marty was referring to. But I don't think he really meant that the experience of going to a movie theater is going to die. I think he meant that it is endangered. It's interesting, just, you know, at the moment, the films that are doing nicely in the States are independent films, like Greta Gerwig's, you know, the actress, her first film, Lady Bird. It's got terrific reviews, and it's breaking records at the art houses, not, you know, not in the big...
Not competing with the mainstream, yeah.
You know, or Martin McDown's film, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is doing very, very well. He's an Irish filmmaker who made this film in the U.S. And it's interesting that, you know, Indian filmmakers kind of are welcome to come to America and make films as well. Yeah. There isn't a prejudice against Indian filmmakers. It's just that they have to be recognized by some American producers to be invited to come to the States.
Yeah, I mean, but there's also, I mean, for example, Cannes had this whole problem. Netflix produces 2 films, yeah. Amazon produces some films. Netflix wants it straight to digital right in the beginning, and then they say that Netflix is, you know,
Well, Netflix wants it both ways. Netflix wants recognition, its films to be recognized by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. The Academy says, we're not going to recognize the films that you make, even though some of them may be very, very good, unless you give these films a theatrical distribution, or a theatrical release. So right now you'll find, at least in New York and Los Angeles, not in the otherwise, just on the 2 coasts, you'll find all the Netflix documentaries appearing in movie theaters. You'll find also their most recent releases like Dee Reese's film Mudbound, which is open to very good reviews in theaters. Amazon doesn't have the same attitude toward theaters as Netflix. So a film that Amazon produces will be shown in theaters before it goes on to the Amazon site. But things, you know, are moving swiftly and quickly, and things change all the time. The other, you know, the Netflix and Amazons could be markets in the States for a number of the independent Indian films. You know, the films I see in the bazaar and like, I'm, you know, happy to talk to my, you know, friends at Amazon and Netflix and say, you guys should, you know, consider these, because this is a way of having access to the American market.
Yeah, it's one access. What do you think are the others? Where? I mean, sometimes one wonders, because we have a kind of an Indian filmmaker has a kind of outlet. He can always adjust his content a bit. He can say, I'm going to shift my filmmaking a bit, and there's a ready Indian. There's a lot more temptation. You think we give in too easily? You say that, you know, there's not that body of work of an Indian filmmaker. You just say 2 films, and then he disappears, and it's not like Ray. What is your assessment of why it happens? My assessment is because, you know, it's true. My assessment is that there's an easier way out. The Iranian doesn't have an easier way out. He only has the difficult way out, you know. Or sometimes then, you know, the state policy also kind of intrudes, but in Iran, filmmakers have a difficult time, so they make independent films. But sometimes the weight of, you know, often like somebody like Ray was accused of being Western in quotes, by pandering to Western tastes.
Yes.
But actually sometimes somebody else discovers you, and often the way to find yourself is through someone else, and then it comes back. You know, do you think that that's true of Indians, and how would you think of independent Indian cinema to survive and find its, what would be your view on how to carry on?
My feeling is that as long as you had, well, first of all, the independent cinema of India is amazing in terms of its variety and its numbers. I mean, at the viewing room alone here, there's 170 films. These are films made in a 12-month period outside the industry by filmmakers, men and women with a certain passion and a certain vision. That in itself, some are not so good, some are very good, but that in itself is an amazing number. But I think that, I'm thinking, why is it that Sajid Ray could make so many films? And very few other filmmakers have made such a body of film. Raj Kapoor has, Adur Gopalakrishnan has, but why is it? And I think that probably Ray could finance his films in part because his films were successful abroad. So there was money coming in to make his 16th, 17th, and 18th film. Now, as you pointed out, no filmmaker has had that celebrity since. You know, not Gatak, not Manny Call, not anybody, not even Marino Sen, who did have some celebrity. So the idea is that perhaps, you know, some of these, a filmmaker has to be better known abroad to bring money back into India to make, you know, his third or her third or fourth film. I don't know how to go about that except to attract the attention of the public, or at least the critics who would send the filmmakers to, the audience to the films. For instance, you know, as I said, I was blown away by Court.
But Court wasn't in Cannes, why?
I can't tell you. I'm not.
I'm just saying, because, you know.
So I'll tell you why.
Sometimes I wonder. Sometimes you go to Cannes. Sometimes you go somewhere, and then you see a film, and you see some Indian films, and say, why was this film not there, and why is this film here? So there is maybe a two-way street. Maybe is Indian complexity of it. I don't know what. It's not straightforward. The country's complex.
Nothing's straightforward. Nothing. Not straightforward. No, I'm a very close friend of David Chase, who is the guy who started The Sopranos. And he was put on a film jury in Venice. And it wasn't for the main competition. It was for it's still important, first films. And he called me when he got back from Venice and said to me, Larry, we've just given the award to a really wonderful film. You should know about it. And it was Court. So Court did have a lot of enthusiasm from certain people. And and it did okay, but it should have done
better.
Much better. And the critics were good. The critics were enthusiastic. But the audience didn't come out for it. Now why? I can't tell you. Was it the way it was handled? I don't know. It had a small distributor, but I know the women who distributed the film, and they're very, very good, and they really push the few films that they have. So, you know, to me, it's a shame that Court has not brought more money back for the filmmaker.
I mean, you would assume that a filmmaker like the person who made Court his next film would be with him on the platter, you know, what do you want to do? You know, I mean, so, I mean, in a sense, a career is made, and then, it's like what has happened to, say, the English Indian novel. That you go to a book fair,
Yes.
and everybody's looking for the next Indian author, right? It's happened in a sense. You know, who's the next Arundhati Roy, who's the next Vikram Seth, who's the next Amitabh Ghosh. I mean, that kind of stature. That Indian, I mean, even though there is talent, that kind of stature, you don't go to Cannes and say, well, where is the next Indian film? You know, that's not happening, and that's, I mean, I know there are no easy answers to that, and it's not your fault, but that's the way it is. And I think some of the fault may lie in those that choose films, or those that distribute films, or those that there are some biases or some notions or that work against it. So if you don't take a chance with it, then how is it going to work? I mean, in a sense, you've got to expose people, and Iranian cinema became what it is because films were exposed.
Yes, but still Iranian cinema, even though people talk about Iranian cinema and South Korean cinema, they're not real money winners. That doesn't matter in one way. They're critically accepted, but they're still shown in a limited number of theaters. Of course, they're shown at film festivals all over the world, but so are some Indian films as well. Court may not have been shown at Cannes, but it was shown at other film festivals, other than Venice, which is a pretty good film festival or Toronto. There are many festivals that I think that are very sympathetic to Indian films.
Yeah, and I think we, as cinema is kind of exploding, and the definitions of what is, and for example, documentary was looked down upon, or they were, but now if you see around the world, maybe it's because of the celebritydom of Michael Moore, and some filmmakers who, even Indian documentaries, and people are exploring the form in other ways, the definition of what is fiction, what is not, what constitutes a film, is changing, and Indians are, do you think, coming up with that kind of work and experimenting with it enough?
Well, experimenting is very interesting. You use the word, like, there's a film that I saw here last year, Windseed, Windseed by Babu Eshwar Prasad.
Yeah.
It's really kind of a work of art. And he was an artist who was experimenting. And he made the film, he raised the money, and then he had this very strange problem with the censor. The film wasn't granted a license at first because the censor here said the film is about nothing. And he said he never heard this criticism. I certainly haven't heard it either, but I can understand, a censor saying the film is sexually explicit or politically unacceptable. I don't like those ideas, but I've never heard a censor say, I'm not giving it a certificate because it's not about anything. But he finally got a group of other filmmakers to protest that decision, and one of them was, here's Amar Kumar, who's represented by a major New York gallery, Marion Goodman.
Yeah.
Very interesting filmmaker, but his films are not for theaters. His films are for galleries and museums.
Yeah.
That's also an interesting tactic. But I do think that filmmakers here then have more problems than maybe other places, because when you make a film and you have this reaction by a censor, it becomes more difficult to get your film released. It's a very strange situation. In Iran, you don't make the film in the first place. I mean, you're not given the permission to make the film.
Yeah.
Here, you make your film, and then you're said no license to show it. It's weird.
Yeah, we fight it all the time, but that's true. What do you think of, the state of, let's say, we make films, and I don't know how much you think, but do we take care, or around the world, the idea of archiving, taking care of of our heritage, of what we have made, what we will make in the future.
That's a sad story, because I think that you have a tremendous amount of very interesting films being made, and had been made since 1947.
Yeah.
You have an archive in Pune, which is accredited. It's a part of the World Federation of Film Archives, and it tries to do a very good job. But I think it's woefully underfunded, and it can't. And also, it comes to the questions: how do you preserve the hundreds, if not thousands, of films that are made in India?
Yeah.
You know, since 1947. Do you make a selection? How do you go about that? Or do you preserve everything? Now, film preservation is not an inexpensive activity, but it's part of one's culture, it's part of one's heritage. And it's ironic, you know, the Rai films have been preserved properly because of Marty, and also because of a late Indian filmmaker, Ismail Rahman, known as Ismail Merchant. And it's just very funny because we're talking about Shakespeare, and Shakespeare Walla is reopening in New York on Friday. And it's being restored by a commercial group, the Cone Media Group, restoring many of the Merchant Ivory films. But Merchant himself put money into the restoration of Sajid Jagray's films, which I think was a wonderful thing to do. But the money didn't come from India. The money came from you know, an Indian producer, who's no longer with us.
We can open this to an audience, and if you have questions, and we'll continue this informal conversation with Laurence. If anybody has a question.
I'm just going to pick up on that point exactly you rightly accepted about the bias and prejudice, which amazes me still, because India is now producing a lot of wonderful films like Lunchbox or Kareeb Kareeb, and your films, Hazaron Khwahishein Aisi, and lots of others. Because I made a film in London, and I have to say I'm a coward, I gave it to Bankside Films and Dog Wolf. And you rightly say that they don't take chance to...
Question, ma'am.
That, what can we do about it?
Well,
how do we raise the profile, and, you know, you sitting in New York, and we got to change perception, but how?
Well, there are, you know, the French are very good at doing this, as are the British and the Germans. They have established organizations that are part industry, part governmental, that promote their country's cinema abroad. And I think that India could do the same, but it doesn't. There are offices that these film-producing countries have in cities like, the major cities around the world, not just New York and Los Angeles and London, but they'll have them down, you know, in Buenos Aires, in Beijing. And I think that you have so many very good films here, and great numbers of them, that you should have an organization that is quasi-industry and quasi-government that promotes films. But then I'm realizing you don't, but do you have, this is a question for you, a film industry here? Is Bollywood an industry, or is Bollywood just a group of, I don't mean just, so please don't get, is it a group of producers who come and go and make films? But is there a centralized thing that Bollywood is?
Well, there are associations, and there are people that have been around a long time, but most of them tend to find funding independently. But, you know, for the past 10 years, Bollywood also has, or the word has changed, because it's half kind of American, because there's Fox. there's Disney, there's Paramount, there's Warner, there's Amazon,
Yes.
and Netflix is walking in, and some others will. So I mean, yeah, it's slowly forming into an industry from the time, where every producer sort of borrowed money and put his neck on the line. So I used to say that since 47, 90% of the producers have lost their shirts, but the government has made money on all of them because of entertainment tax. But yeah, it's forming. I mean, one of the good things of India is also this lack of organization, because sometimes things can get through which will not get through in a centralized. So somebody like a court can happen out of nowhere.
Yes.
Like any film can happen out of just because of a passion of a person putting money in the person making it. But it's not as organized as that, but it is forming in a way. We are becoming, let's say, for better or for worse, more American.
The reason I asked the question is because if India did have something like Uni-France or the German films, which is again half industry, half government, would there be an industry to be half of this organization?
Yeah, personally, I would think that NFDC should be that organization. And that as an organization, I think that is the function of NFDC to take and to coordinate more with the private players and to take Indian films, let's say, and for that the government would have to back, I think, NFDC, like the Koreans may have done by the Busan Festival and by the promotion of their films. So, say 15 years ago when Busan started, Korean cinema was not that well known around the world. But now it is. And would you say that it's because of a concentrated government effort?
I think it's definitely a concentrated government effort, and I know the man. There was actually one or two men who were really dedicated to the idea of promoting Korean cinema, and they did it very, very well.
Yeah.
But he worked for the government, and Busan it came at the right time at the right place.
Yeah.
Now they're having problems in terms of various problems in terms of censorship, and it's losing some of its luster. But Busan was very important to the recognition of Korean cinema. Also, Korean cinema really appealed to certain directors of very major film festivals.
Yeah.
Who made it a point to show, Korean films because they seem to be representing something new. And in terms of Korean cinema, I think it was, you can correct me if I'm wrong, France that led the way.
I think so. When I went there, Uni-France was there, and Toscan du Plantier, I think, played a big role.
Yes, and there are a number of critics who also felt, really were engaged.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, critics is an interesting point because, say, when Ray came on, there were a lot of critics that sort of, in a sense, not explained, but put forward this great mind, this filmmaker from a place, people like, even Americans like Andrew Saris and people like that, they did, and I don't think there are those people now who are putting Indian cinema up like that.
That's very true, and maybe what the Film Bazaar should do is to invite certain important critics to come and see some of the films here, like some writers from IndieWire, which is very important in the States. A lot of or Hollywood Reporter. I think there has to be more interest on critics who write for, actually, maybe not Hollywood. Well, yeah. I was going to say for popular newspapers and popular magazines or websites to come and talk about Indian cinema. Because it's unknown. It's not, and people, as you said, they resist American audiences resist going to see Indian films. When it comes to art films, they'd rather go see the Iranian film or the South Korean film.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you why this is, except that people might think all Indian films are Bollywood films. I don't know.
Yeah.
Lunchbox did very well. Did very well.
Yeah. I mean, there's always this odd, Meera Nair film. There's this odd film that does well. Exceptions.
And don't forget, there's a great enthusiasm for kind of the mysticism of India in the States. Every American wants to go see the Taj Mahal. They want to come to India. They think it, and I think so too. It's a very special place. So there isn't an antipathy toward India. There's, if anything, an interest in the culture of this country. So it's very strange it doesn't translate.
Yeah, that's what I find odd. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sir, I have a question for you, sir. As someone who has been looking at very keen eye on world cinema over the years, I just want to have your thoughts on this syndrome that is the superhero movies that franchises that Hollywood keeps churning out. Why don't we get to see any more Godfathers or Lawrence of Arabia's these days from the core Hollywood, so to say?
I have no idea. I do not, on the whole, I don't go to see the superhero movies. They just don't interest me. But they really take up a lot of air in critical discourse in the States, which really saddens me. Now, why you don't see films like, Lady Bird here, I know there are many really excellent American independent films. But that is, the films that come here are, they need distribution, so you have to find Indian distributors who would take a chance with
Do you
these
think
films.
in film criticism, the entertainment products and cinema is confused now? I mean, there's this Marvel universe, and they're entertainment products, in a sense, the Avengers series or whatever.
Well,
Why are they reviewed on the same level as, say, a Martin Scorsese film, an Anderson film, a Coen Brothers film?
Well,
yeah, I mean, in the sense they're kind of mixed up.
They are mixed up, but the major newspapers and the major television critics and the major bloggers have to write about, the big Hollywood films. I mean, that's what the newspapers do. They report on, but they also report on these other films, smaller films. But the headlines go to the large films. Like every Friday now in New York, there are about 25, 30 new films open. And so, but the headlines are for the big Hollywood films.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult to get press for the small films, except when you have something like Lady Bird. Now, I don't want to oversell it. Lady Bird is the first film by the actress Greta Gerwig. It's very good. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's as good as a good film should be. But and it's refreshing that people are going to see it. Also, the 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is a very fine film as well. But it would be great, if audiences also went to see some of these films that I'm seeing here at the Film Bazaar over the years. But they're just not. But as long as we keep writing about them and talking about them, maybe, they will live. And that's what I think that we would want to happen.
Yeah. Well, I think, if there's no other question, then, this was a great conversation and I hope you enjoyed it. I've got a signal to end it, but thank you so much.
Okay.
And if you have any questions, Laurence, he's around.
See you at drinks later.
Drinks later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful. Thank you.
so much, Laurence. Thank you so much, Sudhir, for this wonderful conversation with such amazing historical anecdotes. And thank you, everyone.
I talked with Laurence, and there was a Woodwell story which he confirmed for me. You know, Woodwell was also he worked at Montmartre. So my favorite Woodwell story at Montmartre is that he showed the first footage in the 1930s of Hitler, the Leni Riefenstahl films, to von Sternberg and Charlie Chaplin. And when he showed that in Montmartre, Chaplin, when he saw the first footage of Hitler, was on the floor laughing. And von Sternberg, because he was German, he saw the horror of it and he was crying. So Chaplin made, after that, Great Dictator. And that was from Montmartre, you know.
Oh, well, to add to that story, I just wanted to say that Buñuel also made a version for the for the U.S. to understand German propaganda, in which he took Triumph of the Will, which actually was a gift of the German government to MoMA. But that's another story, because MoMA wanted films by Fritz Lang and Murnau. And the German government, which was Nazi at the time, said, "Sure, we'll give you those films as a gift. But we're also going to give you this, you know, these Nazi propaganda films too." So Buñuel took Triumph of the Will, and he took all of Hitler's speeches and reduced the 2-hour film to like 40 minutes, just showing, you know, Hitler arriving on the plane and the parades and how the German propaganda worked. And we distributed, MoMA distributed it for many years. And after, in the 1980s, the German government gave Leni Riefenstahl back the copyright to Triumph of the Will, because she was still alive and she did make it, even though it's an important work. And she immediately wrote to MoMA saying, "I understand that you are distributing an abortion of my work. You must stop it." So that's just another story.
Montmartre didn't stop it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody.